Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the stream tonight. I am a little sweaty because I always turn up the heat right before stream to heat up the room, and then I have to turn off the heat because it makes background noise. But let's just make sure I am not blasting anybody's eardrums right now. Thank you to everybody who is here. I really appreciate every single person who does tune in. Tonight we're going to be discussing genetics for memetics. And basically, I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but Richard Dawkins actually coined the term meme in 1976 in this book right here, which is the main material that we're going to be covering tonight. And so here's the thing. Richard Dawkins coined this term in the last chapter of this book. And he didn't really anticipate how widespread the actual term meme would become. He was very successful in creating a meme himself, and there are several choices that he actually made while he was making up the term that led to its success. And one of the coolest things about the term meme is the fact that its very popularity demonstrates memetic theory in itself, because at first this term had kind of like a general meaning, or rather, not that it was vague, but it was more, it didn't have anything to do with the internet. Let me just put it that way. It didn't have anything to do with the internet. And then people started to look around the internet and see that there were things about this term and the way that Dawkins had described it that really resonated with them. And meme got this kind of like secondary meaning as a term that is specifically for the internet. So when we say meme, what we generally mean is internet memes. So when there's discussions online of memes, you generally can think internet meme. Even though we don't say internet meme, that is what we mean, because meme is actually a more general term than that, even though that's not exactly how it's used. So we're going to get into how this term was created and its meaning on this stream. We're also going to be going over some genetic concepts and some biological concepts. I have tried my best to really make this interesting, but there are going to be technical terms for sure. It is what it is, and I read somewhere that if you are passionate enough about something, you have to be willing to be boring about it. And the thing is that memes are very exciting to me, and I hope that my enthusiasm will make this material be a little less dry for you, and you won't have any flashbacks to ninth grade biology, because there are going to be heavy flashbacks tonight. And if you know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, then you are definitely ahead of the game. But anyway, just another welcome to everybody here on stream. I very much appreciate every single person who tunes in. And yeah, let's get started. So first I'm going to introduce this book. So this book is The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, and what most people probably know Richard Dawkins from is from like the God delusion and his anti-religious rhetoric. I'm not really going to be covering that rhetoric on stream tonight, and it's not something I'm like super concerned about. New atheism is a lot, and I could go on a tangent about all the issues with it. I'm personally an atheist, but I just don't really like jive with the political, biases of a lot of people who are considered new atheists. But anyway, so please try to put whatever, prejudices you have against Richard Dawkins aside. And also, we'll try to put aside his religious prejudices. And everyone will learn a little bit about memes today, if we're able to do that. So anyway, this book is generally pretty concerned with genetics. It's not a book about memetics. And the only part that's about memetics is a single chapter, which was the final chapter of the first edition. And then there were other chapters that were added in later editions. But the point being that Dawkins spent this entire book talking about the DNA molecule. And he put forth this idea that there are things called replicators, which are units that replicate themselves. And essentially what he wanted to do, as he explained, was cut the gene down to size by suggesting that there might be a different type of replicator on our planet. And that replicator is the meme. And then the internet got a hold of the term. The general world got a hold of the term, and they really liked it. So they started using it, and they started saying, oh, this is a meme, or the dancing baby is a meme, etc., etc. And so the internet actually helped really popularize the term. And anyway, so we're going to get into that. This is going to be an ongoing series of streams. Every Wednesday night, I'm going to be covering topics in genetics for memetics. So in order to understand memetics, you have to kind of understand genetics, not because everything within memetics is an analog for something in genetics, but because the people who came up with these terms were geneticists for the most part. So anyway, we are going to get going. And I'm going to be quoting a lot from Richard Dawkins. I'm going to be going over this chapter where he coined the term meme. And then in the following weeks, we're going to be diving deeper into the subject. So every Wednesday night at 8 p.m., you will have me talking about the science of memes. But yeah, it is a rather short chapter. It is a little under 20 pages in this very thick book. I read the whole thing, and it's a pretty good book. The essential argument of it is that the largest practical unit for natural selection is the gene, as opposed to the individual or the group. And so people like Dawkins are genetic, I think they're called, the other people are called like group selectionists. I think he might be like a genetic selectionist. I'm not sure. But then there's also people who argue that natural selection actually takes place on multiple levels. And we'll get into more about units of evolution, units of imitation a little bit later. But yeah, this chapter is called Memes, the New Replicator. Alrighty, so let's get started. So the reason that this is interesting to people, I think, the reason that memetics and the term meme is interesting to people is because Richard Dawkins put forth these ideas, and then people saw those ideas in the world and were able to assign those ideas to the label meme. And so they were able to kind of take part in the evolution of the term itself and take part in its memetic evolution, the memetic evolution of the term meme. And so what Dawkins argues is that cultural transmission is analogous to genetic transmission. And so that means that some of the rules that govern, or the factors that govern genetic evolution, also govern cultural evolution, or as we can call it, memetic evolution. And so factors within culture and within our world give rise to evolution through competition. And language, for example, is an example of memetic evolution, because as he gives the example in the chapter in the Selfish Gene, so Chaucer, very famous English writer in the early modern period, could talk to his neighbors about the happenings of the day. And his neighbors would understand him. They would understand the kind of, in between English and German that early modern English was. And so there has been a line of English speakers between us and Chaucer. And all of those English speakers could all understand each other. But when we go back and we try to read Chaucer, we need a translator and we need a translation. Or rather, like, if we are going to read it, we have to learn the language that he was using, even though we would call our language English and he might call his language English. I don't know if they actually called it English back then, but it's the same language. And the way that language evolves is a process that Dawkins claims is analogous to genetic evolution. And so this cultural transmission is not unique to mankind or humans, but it is rare within the animal kingdom. And a couple different examples might be the songs of songbirds. So there are birds and then there are songbirds. And songbirds memorize through imitation their songs. And these songs are actually geographically determined, as in birds that are closer together in habitat will have songs that are more similar than birds who are farther away in habitat. And this is because the songbirds actually learn these songs through imitating their parents. And in that way, we can say that it's a type of culture. And this is also something that happens within certain species of monkeys. So cultural transmission really, really starts with imitation. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But I guess songbirds can be said to have culture. And certain groups of monkeys can, not human monkeys, but monkeys, can be said to also have culture. And so one of Dawkins' main criticisms of the way that sociobiologists have looked at culture in the past is that they are constantly looking for the biological advantage of a certain cultural practice. Darwinians have generally sought the biological advantage for culture. And so what the biological advantage for culture is that certain cultural activities are more this is something Dawkins is actually criticizing, that idea. But essentially, a lot of sociobiologists have always felt the need to ultimately connect the reasons we have culture, the reason we participate in certain practices, back to biological advantages. Advantages that let us reproduce, that let us live longer, etc., etc. Things that tie back to biology. But this type of explanation, according to Dawkins, actually fails to account for cultural diversity. And so the human condition all around the globe is, very, very different. Of course, different areas have their different cultures. And what Dawkins is saying is that if these cultures tied only back to biological advantages and biological aspects, then all the cultures would be the same, because we are all pretty much adapting to similar, circumstances. And that means very, very basic circumstances. For example, people in the northern US or in, closer to the poles are obviously going to deal with temperature differently than people at the equator. But essentially, that doesn't mean that someone born in a cold climate can't go to the equator and adapt. So as humans, there's lots of places on the planet that we can live with our biological characteristics. And so essentially what Dawkins is arguing is that if our cultural practices only tied back to biological advantages, then our cultures would all be pretty similar, because we can all survive within the environment of the earth. And so what Dawkins is arguing is that cultural practices don't have to be tied to biological advantages. They can actually be tied to cultural advantages. So participating within certain cultural practices makes a person more successful within that culture, and it doesn't have to be tied back to the biological practices of it doesn't have to be tied back to the biological advantages of a certain cultural practice. And so the reason that Dawkins is putting this forward and making the point that cultural advantages can be for their own sake and aren't necessarily tied to biology is because this idea expands the context of Darwinism, which we will go over the very definition of that a little bit later, but it expands the context of Darwinism past the gene and argues for a type of universal Darwinism, that many processes that we can observe on Earth are subject to the same forces that create biological advantages. And so, the next thing that is really important to understand within this overall idea is the idea of replicators. And so a replicator is a replicating entity. And that sounds kind of vague, because it is. And the reason that we're going to leave it a little bit vague is because we're dealing with both genetics and memetics. And a replicating entity within the selfish gene theory is the DNA molecule. And with the DNA molecule, hello, Jake had a cake. I am glad that you had a cake, Jake. But anyway, so in this selfish gene theory, the DNA molecule is the replicating entity. And someone who is a group selectionist might think that it's the group, but anyway, I like your username, Jake has a cake. Okay, cool. So now we're gonna actually have one of our moments of flashing back to biology in high school, because we do need to understand the difference for this discussion, the difference between genotype and phenotype. And so let me make sure I have the right clip queued. Was I going to show that one? One moment. Okay, so before we get into all this, I think it's really important that we understand the difference between genes, DNA, and chromosomes. And because I so anyway, yeah, it's important that we understand the difference between genes, DNA, and chromosomes. So I'm just gonna play this short little clip. It's about 2 minutes, and it will be a nice little talk on the difference between these things. Anyway, so I'm actually gonna hop off for a minute, but just watch this really quick. I have to use the little girl's room, which was bad planning, but please enjoy.
You can think of DNA, genes, and chromosomes as forming a kind of blueprint of life. These are the plans that tell the body how to make things, in this case proteins, which are the body's basic building blocks. But unlike a blueprint for a house where all the information is stored on a flat piece of paper, the blueprint of life has many levels of organization to it. Let's start with DNA, the most basic level. A DNA molecule is made up of a sugar backbone and 4 flavors of a molecule called a nucleotide. These nucleotides are arranged along the backbone in a unique order. When your body needs a particular protein, it reads the sequence of nucleotides and uses it as a template to make that protein. Moving up a level of organization, we have genes. Genes are long snippets or chunks of DNA. They're also the most basic unit of inheritance. Traits are passed on from parents to children in the form of genes. Genes include other information about building proteins. For example, they tell the body how long a protein should be and how much to make and when to make it. Genes also have directions about where DNA can be edited out to make proteins with different functions. This is how the body makes an estimated 1 million proteins from only 20,000 genes. The next level up is the chromosome. Humans have 46 of these, arranged in pairs. Chromosomes are long strands of DNA wrapped around beach ball-like proteins called histones. Chromosomes contain many genes, along with long stretches of DNA, whose purpose we've yet to figure out. In order to make a protein, DNA has to be unwound from its histones. This is controlled by a process called acetylation, and it's just another level of control the body has over the production of proteins. So as you can see, the blueprint for our bodies is quite well organized. If only that was the case for the rest of our lives. For Scientific American's Instant Egghead, I'm Eric Olson.
Okay, good. I said some stupid stuff anyway. I always forget to turn back on the mic. But anyway, that was, and I was also being distracted by Jake had a cake. Anyway, so, yes, we have fixed that now. So great. We are back to here. So when we're talking about genes, when we say genes, we think we mean one thing, and we might actually be talking about different things. And so sometimes I love it. I love it. Anyway, so it is time for meme class. Anyway, so evolution at the core of it is caused by the differential survival of replicating entities. Now, what the F does that mean? So differential survival means that different replicating entities have different characteristics, and within a certain environment, those characteristics can make these entities either more likely to reproduce or less likely to reproduce. And so that's how evolution occurs, is that certain entities have certain characteristics that give them an advantage, and certain entities have characteristics which give them a different disadvantage. And within a given environment, there is generally, at least on this planet, a limit of how much or many resources there are. And so, yeah, in what Dawkins was essentially arguing is that DNA is an example of a replicator, and our bodies are just vehicles for that replicator. Essentially, there was the primeval soup, as it is called, where all life evolved from. And when we were back in that primeval soup, we didn't actually have cell walls. And when I say we, that's a very loose term. I mean life. Most life forms didn't have cell walls, and then they evolved cell walls, and then they evolved nuclei, and then DNA used to just kind of like float around in the primeval soup. And DNA used to just like kind of float around in the primeval soup, and then eventually got enclosed within nuclei and within cells. And yeah, it's easy to mix up Dawkins and Darwin. That is a good point. I might have messed it up. But anyway, so essentially Dawkins was arguing that there is, I do want to become famous by buying followers, primes, and views right now on click.com. Thank you, bot. Anyway, so Dawkins was arguing that there is one replicator, which is the DNA and the DNA molecules, and on the other hand, we have the meme. And he came up with this term all by himself. It didn't really occur before that, but he based it off several words in other languages. And one of them is meme from Greek. And meme definition, meaning imitation. So the word, I forgot to look up what meme meant. Oh, thank you for the tip about Nightbot. But so meme comes from imitation, and what Dawkins was arguing was that a meme, as he defined it, is a unit of imitation. So it can also relate to memory. And also the French word meme, which is this thing for like same. Like you say même chose, which is one of actually the few French terms that I know. And that means same thing. So même chose means same thing. And meme means same in a way. And he also wanted something that sounded like gene. And so he wanted a monosyllable that sounded like gene, and gene and meme rhyme. He denoted that it should rhyme with cream. And examples of memes were tunes, ideas, catchphrases, clothing fashions, ways of making pots or building arches, anything that is culturally transmitted. And so how do memes spread? Within genetics, we know very specifically how genes spread, and that is through sperm or eggs and through meiosis. And meiosis is a biological process distinct from mitosis, which is the way that normal cells replicate themselves. And going back to 9th grade biology, I'm just going to show this clip really quick because they explain it a little bit better than I do. And where is it? Okay, I think it's in this document right here. And just drag it over. Okay, cool. I think this should work. Yes, okay. So I'm going to turn off my audio and I will remember to turn it back on.
Meiosis is a special type of cell division that produces sex cells, also known as gametes. Sex cells are needed for reproduction when an egg cell joins with a sperm cell to form a whole new organism. Most cells in the human body have 46 chromosomes. Meiosis is a special type of cell division that produces sex cells, also known as gametes. Sex cells are needed for reproduction when an egg cell joins with a sperm cell to form a whole new organism. Most cells in the human body have 46 chromosomes, but sex cells only need half this number. That way, the new baby gets 23 chromosomes from its mother and 23 chromosomes from its father to form a full set. Meiosis involves 2 cycles of cell division, called meiosis I and meiosis II. Each cycle involves the same 4 stages as mitosis, PMAT, with some important differences. Just like mitosis, the parent cell copies its DNA before cell division begins, so each single-stranded chromosome becomes double-stranded. In prophase I, the chromosomes condense and join together in homologous pairs. Each pair contains 1 chromosome from the father and 1 from the mother, with different copies of the same genes. Genes are swapped within each pair in a process called crossing over. The nucleus begins to break down. In metaphase I, the pairs of chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell. Fibers attach the chromosomes to 2 bodies on opposite sides of the cell. In anaphase I, the fibers separate the pairs by pulling them apart. In telophase I, 2 nuclei form, and then the cell splits into 2 cells, each with 23 double-stranded chromosomes. In meiosis II, each cell will divide again to form 4 cells with 23 single-stranded chromosomes. In prophase II, the chromosomes condense and the nucleus breaks down. In metaphase II, the chromosomes line up in the middle of the cell. In anaphase II, fibers pull single-stranded chromosomes apart. And in telophase II, nuclei form, and finally, the cells divide. The 4 sex cells produced by meiosis are genetically different to each other and to the original cell. This genetic variety helps explain why siblings can look and behave so differently from one another.
Yay, I remembered to turn back on the, I remembered to turn back on my audio. Anyway, so the reason that I'm showing these things about meiosis and mitosis is essentially because we are having to really understand the genetics in order to understand the memetics, because the thing is that there's a lot of disagreements about how valid memetic theory is. Like, do we really need memetics? Is it not something that is in the field of semiotics, for example? And I would have to say that I think that the reason that we need the field of memetics in general is because this field makes it explicit that we are referring to Darwin's ideas. And that is not something that is within, not that it isn't something that's within the field of semiotics, but it's not something that semiotics automatically denotes. And so when we see memes leaping from brain to brain, through imitation, then we have genes coming together within meiosis to create zygotes. And zygotes are what happens when the sperm and the egg go together. And so the sperm has 23 chromosomes, the egg has 23 chromosomes, they go together, and they have 46 chromosomes. And so this is like a chemical process, but when we're talking about memetics, it is a cultural process, and we're talking about cultural evolution. But as Dawkins points out, that is not, these categories are not as cut and dry or as separate as we might think they are. So within the chapter, Dawkins actually quotes someone who helped him review the chapter. And this N.K. Humphrey, who I think is a person who works at some university somewhere, says, memes should be regarded as living structures, not just metaphorically, but technically. When you plant a fertile meme, in my mind, you literally parasitize my brain, turning it into a vehicle for the meme's propagation in just the way that a virus may parasitize mechanics of a host cell. And this isn't just a way of talking. The meme for, say, belief in life after death is actually realized physically millions of times over as a structure in the nervous system of individual men the world over. So essentially the argument here is that because we have thoughts in our brains, and our brains are physical things, then in some ways these thoughts are physically manifested within our brains. So when we talk about memes, they're not actually just these abstract cultural things, they actually exist within the brain as a kind of chemical or physical structure. And we know so little about the mechanics of the brain. It's very hard to see these things, but there have been some advances in functional MRI scanning that can see brain activity and has been able to guess people's dreams and stuff like that. So with genes and memes as analogs, there are some issues with this framework. And, some argue that cultural analysis should always lead back to the comparative biological advantages of holding and perpetuating a certain idea. And this makes the new replicator memes subservient to the old replicator of genes. And Dawkins argues against this, stating that they are actually separate replicators and a meme should not be made inferior to a different replicator. And as Dawkins states, biologists have assimilated the idea of genetic evolution so deeply that we tend to forget that it is only one of many possible types of evolution. So his argument is that biology is an explanation that could work within certain behaviors, but it's not necessarily the end-all and be-all. And that geneticists actually are so used to this idea that they forget that Darwinistic principles can actually apply other places. So yeah, anyway, not all genes that can replicate themselves do so, just as not all memes that can replicate themselves do so. And so just a note, there is a difference between a genotype and a phenotype. And if I say the word genotype, what I mean is someone's genetic characteristics and not the characteristics that they necessarily display. And I'm just going to put on a quick video that explains the difference between genotype and phenotype very well, just so that everyone has the reference for... This happens sometimes when I'm streaming. My mouse will actually disappear, so that's what just happened. Okay, great. So the last video, I'm sorry that was such like, he was a very nice, he was a very nice British man. And he just kind of had a soft voice, so I hope that this one actually works better. But just so you guys know these terms, here's a short video on genotype.
Thanks for stopping by. Today we're going to talk about genotypes versus phenotypes. So when you have a trait, that is a pair of alleles, such as big B, little b, or little b, we can refer to them in two different ways. The first is the genotype, which refers to the exact pairing of the alleles. For example, if we're dealing with eye color and there are two alleles, a big B for blue eyes and a little b for green eyes, then there are three possible genotypes: big B, little b, or little b, right? So these are the genotypes. These are the possible pairing of the alleles. The genotype isn't concerned with the expression of the trait, only the pairing of the alleles. Okay. The other way to refer to a trait is by the phenotype, which is its expression. So using our previous example of eye color, there are only two phenotypes: blue eyes or green eyes. Right? The phenotype isn't concerned with the pairing of the alleles. Right? The genotypes big B, and big B, little b both give the same phenotype, blue eyes. Okay, so the phenotype is just the expression. All right, so to recap, the genotype refers to the pair of alleles for a trait, in this case, the specific letters, and the phenotype refers to the expression of that trait, right? How it looks or how it functions, the expression, okay? And that's it. So I know this can be a confusing concept, so hopefully that helps. And if you have any additional questions, please throw them in the comments. I'll see what I can do to.
So the difference between genotype and phenotype is that the genotype are the genetic characteristics that a person has, and they might have, for example, a gene on their X chromosome for blue eyes, but that's recessive. And so if they have a gene on their Y chromosome for brown eyes, that means they're going to have brown eyes because that is dominant. So that is the phenotype. So even though if they had both the dominant trait for brown eyes on their X and Y chromosome, the phenotype would still be brown eyes, even if the genotype was different from someone who has the dominant allele for brown eyes and a recessive allele for blue eyes. So that's what that term refers to if I'm using it, and I think I will be using it. So just so everybody knows. If you have a question, that's not about my relationship status, how old I am, etc., I will kindly and happily answer those. So going back to these genes, not all genes that can replicate do end up replicating. What makes a meme successful and what makes a gene successful? Well, these are things that Dawkins at least argues are analogous between memes and genes. So things that are successful and make a gene successful are going to be the similar things to what makes a meme successful. And these three things are longevity, fecundity, and copying fidelity. And so longevity refers to how long a single meme or gene lasts in the meme or gene pool. So that doesn't mean a single iteration of a meme or gene. It means the total number of the meme or gene within the gene pool, how long that persists. And so fecundity is the second characteristic, and that's how often a gene or meme can reproduce itself. And so, yeah, so that's how often, so fecundity is how often it reproduces. And yeah, and then there's also copying fidelity. So copying fidelity is how well something copies itself. And so when we're looking at genes, when we were all floating around in the primeval soup, DNA had certain characteristics that made it more or less able to cope with the environment. And so if we had like a unit of replication, or we had a single-celled organism, something like that, and they happen to have like all these great characteristics that help them survive, if they couldn't pass on those characteristics, then it would all be for naught. And if their cells were really bad at copying these characteristics, then it would all be for naught. So essentially, copying fidelity is how well something reproduces itself. Yeah. So brown eyes are the most prominent when reproducing, and that's how genotype and phenotype can be distinguished. So a person might have a recessive gene for blue eyes, but the dominant gene for brown eyes, and they will have brown eyes. And then another person with brown eyes might have two dominant genes for brown eyes. And so that demonstrates how two people's phenotypes can be the same, even if their genotypes are different. And so, so longevity itself, when we say longevity, we're actually not really talking about the longevity of a single replicator, or a single iteration of a replicator. What we're talking about is how long that replicator can stay within the population. And so it's relatively unimportant. So this isn't like, oh, I have the genes for living a really long time, that's my longevity. No. What this is talking about is like how long the genes for like blue eyes or brown eyes have been floating around, and or how long a meme format has been floating around, as opposed to the popularity of a single iteration of a meme. And this is how it kind of like crosses over from genetic theory to memetic theory. And yeah, as I keep saying, we can't always find an exact equivalent for everything in genetics in memetics. And that's just not something that we should even try to do. But putting these two fields together really can show us a lot about cultural evolution and about the way that culture evolves. So yeah, fecundity is actually more important for a single iteration of a replicator. So it's not as important if a entity lives a long time. Okay, let me rephrase that. It's more important that an entity reproduce a lot than live a long time. So that means for the genes at least. So when we're looking at memetics, maybe we could say that it's more important that people be able to interact meaningfully with a meme format than it is for a single iteration of a meme to be particularly popular. People have to be more familiar with the format, and it doesn't really matter so much how they interact with single iterations of the meme, so long as the format itself becomes a mode or a genre within the internet. And then we have copying fidelity. So when we're talking about copying fidelity, how much copying fidelity can a meme really have? It really depends. And also, memetic evolution is very different from the particulate kind of like all or nothing quality of genetic transmission. And it looks like memetic transmission is subject to continuous mutation and continuous blending. So when we're looking at the unit of the gene or meme, the definition of these is not static and is actually formed through convenience. So we want to set our unit to be the most convenient unit for us. And many genes affect a single characteristic like height. But we say he has the genes for, long legs, for example. And we also, skin tones seem to blend between mother and father, but what is actually happening is that the actual genes for skin tone don't blend. It's just that we inherit some genes from the mom and some genes from the dad, and it happens, our phenotype or our skin tone is going to be a result of the way that those genes interact. And so that's one way that genetic and memetic evolution are actually very, very different, because we get blending within memetic evolution, but we don't get blending within genetic evolution. They used to think, way back when, I think it's called like Lamarckian evolution or Lamarckian genetics, they used to think that the characteristics of the mom blended with the characteristics of the dad and came forth and whatever. And then Gregor Mendel, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, did a lot of experiments with pea plants, because pea plants have certain characteristics and also are just like pretty fecund, as we say. And so it's easier-ish to reproduce. And you can see a lot of generations in a short amount of time. And so, yeah, where was I? Okay, cool. So when we're looking at genetics, I'm pointing out that when we say gene, like we think that, let me put it this way. When we talk about genes, we are probably referencing a bunch of different things and think we're all referencing the same thing. A lot of times when people say genes, what they mean is chromosomes, or phenotype, or any of these other terms. But the point I'm making is that we can determine the unit of the gene according to our situation. And so if we're looking at memetic evolution, Dawkins gave this example of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which is the Hallelujah Symphony. And so is the symphony as a whole a meme, or is the Hallelujah, 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 etc. Is that the meme, right? So I actually, so as he suggests, there are different units we can use depending on what it is that we want to analyze. And I wanted to quote directly from Dawkins right now about his idea of what an idea meme is. There is some essence of Darwinism, which is present in the head of every individual who understands the theory. If this were not so, then almost any statement about two people agreeing with each other would be meaningless. An idea meme might be defined as an entity that is capable of being transmitted from one brain to another. The meme of Darwin's theory is therefore that essential basis of the idea which is held in common by all brains that understand that theory. The differences in the way that people represent the theory are then, by definition, not part of the meme. If Darwin's theory can be subdivided into components such that some people believe component A but not component B, while others believe B but not A, then A and B should be regarded as separate memes. If almost everyone who believes in A also believes in B, if the memes are closely linked, to use the genetic term, then it's convenient to lump them together as one meme. So this kind of describes the difference between a meme and an iteration of a meme. And when I say those things, they're very similar to kind of like phenotype and genotype. So the format of a meme would be like Surprise Pikachu or Dat Boy, or which ones are popular these days. There are so many memes and they last like 2 seconds. But anyway, so we have the type of meme, and then we have the actual iteration, which is a single edit of a meme. And so, this shows that when we say gene, we mean a couple different things, and also when we say the word meme, we mean a couple different things. Because not only is meme a more general term than internet meme, so when we say meme, we generally mean internet meme. And then when we say meme again, or when we say internet meme, we could actually mean the format of the meme or a single iteration of the meme. And so like a format of a meme is like the Bernie Sanders meme, which was very popular, and then an iteration of the meme would be the meme that the official account of the US Navy posted with Bernie in a warship, or like in the cockpit of a fighter plane. So the format is the Bernie meme and the iteration is the Navy's meme. So that's a little analogous to me between phenotype and between phenotype and genotype. So now, what are the factors in memetic evolution and in memetic competition? So we've posited that evolution exists within memetics. Now, what are the factors? So memes have nothing really equivalent to chromosomes or alleles. You can argue in the case of internet memes that there's the format and then the iteration. That would be my argument. But there's nothing exactly equivalent to an allele or to chromosomes. And the meme pool, according to Dawkins, is more like the primeval soup than it is today's genetic units. So at one point, our cells were a lot more all over the place. And actually, the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cells, actually evolved from bacteria that became into a symbiotic relationship with the genetics on our cells, in our cells. So we actually incorporated bacteria into ourselves. So Dawkins's point is right now we are still floating around in the primeval soup of the meme. And this doesn't rule out that memes as replicators won't create other structures from themselves. I love the powerhouse of the cell meme. It is great. So yeah, the fact that memes, don't have chromosomes or alleles or anything exactly equivalent does not rule out competition, because life used to not have alleles or chromosomes, and there was still competition that led to life. So when we're talking about memetic evolution, that's kind of where we are. So what are the things that drive competition within memes, within our brain? So we might think of a computer. So a computer only has X amount of storage space. And so we're only going to save to our computer the things that we think are the most important. And we're going to continuously delete the things that we think are unimportant to make room for new things. But the human brain actually has like a crazy amount of storage capacity. We tend to have just like memories that we can't even like consciously recall and are just kind of in some weird corner of our brain. So storage for memes within our brain is actually not as much of a concern as time. So time is a more limiting factor when it comes to memetic evolution, as time is a more limiting factor when it comes to memetic evolution because we can't do more than a couple things at once. And as we start to do more and more things, we as humans start to get crappier and crappier at each of those things, as opposed to computers, which now have parallel processing. So the point is that if a meme is to dominate the attention of a human brain, it must do so at the expense of rival memes, according to Dawkins. So we only have enough time within the day to take in a certain number of memes, and we only have enough time in the day to look at a certain number of memes. And we are going to take those memes in, and then we are going to repeat the memes that are the most compelling to us, that we find the most compelling. And so the characteristics of those memes are the reasons, quote unquote, that a meme is less or more compelling. So other sites of competition besides our brain within memetics, according to Dawkins, are radio and television time, billboard space, newspaper column inches, and library shelf space. So this is something that many librarians are very familiar with, is that you don't have an unlimited number of shelves within a library. You have to make decisions on what you carry and what you don't carry. And so this is memetic competition. This is a competition for what memes will be displayed within that library. And so within genetics, there's also the concept of gene plexes, that certain genes survive and do better when they co-occur with other genes. And so Dawkins posits that, and this is a quote from him, that co-adapted meme complexes evolve in the same kind of way as co-adapted gene complexes. Selection favors memes that exploit their cultural environment to their own advantage. This cultural environment consists of other memes which are also being selected. The meme pool, therefore, comes to have the attributes of an evolutionarily stable set, which new memes find it hard to invade. So, an evolutionary stable set is a very technical term. And what Dawkins means there is that within behavior, for example, or within genetics, there are certain behaviors and phenotypes which tend to perpetuate other behaviors and phenotypes. And so when we're talking about memeplexes, Dawkins gave the example of organized religion. And for example, the meme of the Savior co-occurs with the meme of eternal damnation. And if there was no one who could save you from eternal damnation, then what's the point of the damnation? You're just going to be eternally damned there anyway, so we might as well just sin, right? But the fact that there is a Savior co-occurring within the memeplex of religion with fire and brimstone, this both perpetuates the idea of fire and brimstone and perpetuates the idea of a Savior. And so this is how ideas kind of perpetuate each other. And yeah, so when we free ourselves from looking for the biological advantage of every single cultural practice or behavior, we open ourselves up to the possibility that a cultural trait evolved in ways that are simply advantageous to itself. And looking for the biological advantage of dancing or religion or music is valid. There might be some biological reasons that these practices make it so that an individual who practices them has more fecundity and is able to reproduce. But that doesn't mean that that is the entire basis of the reason that we dance. We dance because we see someone else dancing and we want to dance too because it looks fun. And there are actually a lot of neurons within our brain that mirror the kind of like feeling of actions that we see other people take. Like the ability for us to imitate is actually the genetic predisposition that allows humans to be successful. So I've been going over mostly the selfish gene tonight. Oh, oops. But in later episodes of this series, I'm going to be going over another really great book, which is The Meme Machine. The Meme Machine by Susan Blackmore. It's a really great book. I think she gets a little lost in the sauce sometimes, but for the most part, it is very, very interesting, and she's a very, very engaging writer. So when we start looking at memetic evolution as opposed to genetic evolution, we're going to be moving more and more towards Susan Blackmore. And now this book was written in 1999, which kind of predates it to a lot of internet culture. And so she doesn't talk about internet culture that much within this book, but she has a lot of really, really interesting ideas about language, for example, and the memetics of language. And so, yeah, when we stop looking at these biological advantages, we can start to see why and how humans evolve culture. And good question from the chat. Do books about this subject become obsolete quicker than other subjects? You would think that because memes kind of come and go within a week on the internet. But when we are thinking about memes in general, what we really mean are internet memes. And one example that Dawkins actually gives about memes that are extremely have extreme longevity, let me put it that way, are, for example, Jewish cultural traditions, which have existed for thousands and thousands of years. So that is a meme with much longevity. Now, an internet meme, I'm trying to think of like a format that was literally around for a couple weeks, but sometimes formats come back. But like a format of an internet meme will be around for like a couple weeks. And if we wrote a book about a format, or we mentioned a format within a book, then in a couple years, people might not understand the reference, because the thing is that the culture of the internet has moved on since we were all talking about like Dat Boy or whatever. And so, in a way, but it depends whether or not we're talking about specific formats, or whether we're talking about specific formats, or whether we're talking about genetics or memetics, in a much broader way. So a book on memetics might age better than a book on internet culture. Or the person who writes the book about internet culture is going to have to do more work to ensure that his future readers are going to be able to comprehend what it is he's saying. There's going to be more footnotes about kind of like this layered weirdness that we like to get on the internet, because part of internet culture is actually like this exclusivity. And we like to think that our tastes are the dankest tastes and no one could ever get them. And this is really summarized in the book Kill All Normies by Nagel, I think it is. Maybe we'll go over that book a little bit later on stream. But essentially, that book kind of argues that part of internet culture is that there's like this exclusivity, and people, essentially use memes as inside jokes and as cultural markers, so that they can tell each other whether or not they're in on these inside jokes, and whether or not they're like cool enough to be on 4chan. Am I right? Because it's super cool to like go and be on 4chan, let me tell you. But anyway, so let me put it this way. Sociobiology does not have the best reputation on the internet these days, and this is for a valid reason. A lot of this reason has to do with Jordan Peterson and his ideas about culture and his ideas about sociobiology, and also the way that sociobiology is tied in with incel culture. And now, if you were actually going to look at the scientific validity, so to say, of incel culture or incel ideology, you'd actually find that it has very little to do with sociobiology. So Jordan Peterson is I see the question from the chat, but Jordan Peterson is a professor, I think, at the University of Toronto. So he's a Canadian clinical psychologist, and he's a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. And he is he's one of these like free speech advocates. He's very much aligned with internet centrists, internet right-wing type people. PewDiePie was really into his books. I personally, I have my hot takes on PewDiePie, which I will keep to myself. But the point is that this kind of shows the type of audience that he was cultivating. And he also inserted himself into the discussion about pronouns and discrimination. But yeah, so Jordan Peterson is very much tied to the idea of sociobiology on the internet, unfortunately. But if you look at a lot of his theories and his ideas, it's actually not very related to actual biology. And so Dawkins and Darwin, et cetera, get kind of like this bad rap, unfortunately. And I'd have to say, like, I really like this book, but unfortunately, I think that there are a few chapters, especially on the difference between men and women and stuff like that, that are very culturally limited. And within the cultural analysis within this book, I also find it very wanting. I've actually found factual errors in his analysis of religion, literal factual errors in the way that he is describing these things and applying these things. And so yeah, I mean, one of Jordan Peterson's main things is that you have to completely fix your life before you fix the lives of others or try to interact within the world. And really, that's just a way to push people into inaction, in my opinion. But yeah, we have a lot to do when it comes to the reputation of sociobiology, and Dawkins himself hasn't really helped this. As I said before, he's mostly associated with the new atheism movement, with Sam Harris, and all these people who really, as internet centrists and internet reasonableists, really kind of played into the whole Gamergate thing. And I have my own hot takes about Gamergate and what happened there. But, honestly, these are subjects for different streams and things that I definitely want to get to eventually. But yeah, so this has been Genetics for Memetics. And I hope, I have a question from the chat. Yes, thank you for coming, Dando Rando, love it. So would you view this as a neo-Darwinian view? I definitely would. That is something that Dawkins is very concerned with, and he puts forth the idea that the things that Darwin described when it came to genetic evolution actually apply to fields outside of genetic evolution. And so yeah, it is a neo-Darwinistic view. It is a Darwinistic view, and that is something that Dawkins himself is very, very concerned with. And so some people think that Dawkins' view of this whole thing is actually how do they call it? Like an extreme, like a orthodox or like a fanatically Darwinistic view. And a lot of people, there's actually a lot of criticism of the selfish gene theory, as well as universal Darwinism. There's a lot of people who say, no, I don't think this could apply to everything. And there's a lot of people who say, actually, natural selection happens on multiple different levels, not just on the genetic level, not just on the group level. And so, yeah, there's a lot of debate on the genetic side. And also we have to think about how new the field of genetics and how new the field and thought of Darwin is in a relative sense. It's one of the newer and more materialist views And the thing is, for example, my discipline is English. And when we are in English departments, English classes, we talk a lot about Marx, who was very influenced, who came about at the same time as Darwin. We talk a lot about Marx, but we don't talk a lot about Darwin. And I think that has to do with the fact that a lot of capitalists have used Darwin's ideas to justify the excesses of capitalism. And what is kind of lost is this materialist analysis within Darwin. And Darwin knows that there are limited resources, for example, and worked that into his theory. So yeah, I think he's a very, very important thinker. Of course, no one's going to say Darwin wasn't an important thinker, but the reason that we don't maybe hear about him so much in certain disciplines is because, kind of like for political reasons, social Darwinism was a blight on society for sure. You know, a lot of people arguing that like old people couldn't really contribute to society, but now we are actually finding out from scientists that the reason that humans are so prolific is because of the care of grandmothers and grandparents. So it doesn't break down into this like competition the way that society makes us think, you know? Yeah, so it's a very interesting field, and memetics is also something that is very new. And so when we're looking at memetics, we can look to genetics for a lot of this stuff. But the thing is that memetics is going to have to develop its own praxis. It's going to have to develop its own argumentation. It's going to have to make a real case for why memetics shouldn't be subsumed into something like semiotics. And I don't personally think it should be, but there are a lot of people who are, and they have pretty good, you know, they've written papers about all this. But anyway, just to wrap up, if there are any final questions or concerns that don't have to do with my eye color, my marital status, my age, anything personal, if we can just keep it to memetics and genetics, that'd be super cool. But yeah, thank you guys so much for coming through. What is your take on military memetics? So that's a pretty scary thing, and this is something, I don't know if you were in the stream earlier when I was talking about the Bernie Sanders meme, but I can actually show you this right now. Oh my gosh, my mouse has disappeared, as it likes to do. So unfortunately, so memes, internet memes, we'll put it that way, memes are a type of discourse. And in discourse, we have things called words. I mean, that sounds really kind of basic, but yeah, in discourse, we have things called words. And we can use the same words to express very, very different ideas. And so, for example, we could make a Bernie Sanders meme that was anti-imperialist. That's a possibility. But then also, there's the possibility of this godforsaken thing, you know, that makes me, oh my God, this literally makes my skin crawl. But I mean, this is the whole thing. Okay, I don't want to get political up in here. Bernie's a great symbol, and he definitely raised the profile of, you know, his political stream of thought. And he made it so that socialism wasn't such a dirty word anymore. But on the other hand, he's made some bad and imperialist votes in the past, and in order to get elected to the Senate, you probably had to compromise a lot of things. So going back to military memetics, this is a prime example of that. And it shows that our internet culture can absolutely be co-opted by hegemonic powers in order to perpetuate their agendas. And so we absolutely have to be protecting the internet. We have to be protecting free speech on the internet. We have to be protecting small platforms. I'm glad that 4chan exists personally, because I think that it really shows the possibility of the internet. But there's also a lot of dangers inherent in that. And, that's what we have to really guard against. Yeah, we definitely are, able and should be critical of our politicians, and no one should be, safe from accountability. When we're looking at someone like Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, we also have to acknowledge the limits of these people. Because if they popularize, a certain organization, namely the DSA, if they popularize the DSA, are we just getting a bunch of memberships of people signing up online, or are we actually getting people on the ground who are willing to make a difference in their community? And if we are propping up these politicians and saying they can do no wrong, that's not really true. And it's also not really the best thing for the movement either. But yeah, at least he is wearing a mask. This is true. But anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for coming through. I'm going to be streaming again this Saturday. And also, if anybody wants to follow me on Instagram, I am actually literally 2 followers away from 1,000 followers, and my username is memeprofmeg, the same as on Twitch. So yeah, thank you everybody. Thanks Can't Burped and Cove Light. Thank you so much. I saw you last time in chat, and I very much appreciate my repeat viewers. So tune in on Saturday, and I'll also be back next Wednesday. We'll talk more about the meme machine. So have a wonderful Saturday night. Have some fun. Stay safe. Wear a mask. And bye-bye.